Hello everyone, welcome to Big Data Thoughts. Today we are going to talk about what is hybrid cloud and what is multi-cloud setup. These days we hear this term quite a lot about having a multi-cloud setup. So we would look at what each of these mean, what is the advantage, what is the disadvantage, and also what are the use cases that are there for each of these scenarios. So let's get started. First of all, let's just briefly talk about how things evolved from being on-prem to cloud. So initially, like a number of years back, when there was the systems that we had were only on-premise before the advent of cloud. It's been almost more than a decade now that cloud came and picked up speed, but initially it was all on-prem, and the issue with having on-prem system was that you had to purchase hardware, you had to maintain it, you had to have people with skill set to maintain, upgrade, and keep monitoring those on-prem hardwares. And there was of course a depreciation over time in the hardware. Another bigger problem was that if there was a need to scale, it could not be done quickly because you had to kind of project the demand, understand how much scalability do you need, what is going to be your load, then buy the hardware, set it up, and all of that. So it would take a lot of time to actually purchase, set up, maintain for the systems to scale. There was no quicker way to do that horizontal scaling or vertical scaling without having a proper plan, without purchasing what is required and maintaining it. So doing on-prem had advantage in terms of tighter security, tighter control, but it had a lot of limitations in terms of cost, because there was of course a cost associated with having people who would maintain that, and it was a bigger problem to scale it up. That's where cloud came in, and people started adopting cloud. Organizations started adopting cloud. First, they were adopting it to a limited effect, but then later on the popularity, the advantages of cloud became more prevalent and organizations started adopting cloud more and more. So there was this whole journey from on-prem to cloud. Cloud offered a lot of other benefits that on-prem did not have, or it helped us to overcome the limitations that on-prem had. So in a nutshell, what are the advantages of cloud? First of all, there is no maintenance overhead. We don't have to have people who are admins who would actually constantly monitor and set up our cluster, keep scaling, all of that. So cloud offered three different modes. One was IaaS, which is infrastructure as a service, which means it gives us a facility to get as many machines of whatever type we want, whether Linux or Windows or any type of machines, we could actually get at a click of a button. So it was very easy to scale. Then the second model was platform as a service, something like Amazon EMR, something like Synapse, which is basically a platform as a service where you can utilize an entire platform and build your applications on top of that. You don't have to do everything from scratch. And then there was a third model, which is software as a service. So it can be Salesforce, it can be any other software which is given as a service, like databases as service. Right? So these help the life of a data engineer or a infrastructure engineer. It helped them a lot because it was all on at a click of a button. You could scale, you could utilize any of these services, and you could pay as per your use. You didn't have to purchase bulk, keep it, and during peak loads it is getting utilized, but at other times it is just lying idle. So that was simplified a lot. Then of course scalability, as I mentioned. Experimentation. If there is something I want to experiment, it would be very costly to buy hardware. What if I need GPUs? What if I need TPUs? With the advancement of processing world, I mean the way the processing world, the storage world is evolving, everything is becoming easier and easier. So you don't have to purchase such expensive hardware. You can just, for your experimentation, you can use cloud, do a POC, see how it fits your needs, and then take a call. there was no upfront investment. You didn't have to invest in hardware. And of course, it is very easy on the pocket because it is pay as you go. So all in all, cloud provided a lot of benefits and overcame all the limitations that on-prem had. So we saw this advancement towards cloud or adoption of cloud more and more. And today we have reached a point where people are doing hybrid setups and multi-cloud setups. Now, one question that will come to your mind is that though cloud is so beneficial, so good, all of that, then why do we still have on-prem systems? Why everybody has not gone completely online on cloud? The reason is sometimes organizations want more control on their setup, on their hardware. There are compliance needs, there are security, data privacy needs. For example, there are a lot of regulations in every industry. Organizations want more control over their data. They want to keep their PII data as secure as possible. Also, sometimes it's a mindset that organizations do not want dependency on any other company or third party. They want to control the infrastructure that they have. That is why we would see that still there are a lot of organizations which have on-prem setup. Now, let us talk about what is hybrid cloud. We looked at both the things, the on-prem and the cloud, the advantages that it has. So, hybrid is something which is a combination of public and private cloud, which means so there are multiple vendors like AWS, Azure, Google who have their own cloud infrastructure, and we are using them as our cloud providers. That's our public cloud. So organizations typically prefer to have a combination because of the reasons that I mentioned about privacy, security, control. So what they did was they adopted a hybrid approach, which is a mix of both public and private. So they have their on-premise setup as well as they have extended that to the cloud. So it's a combination of both. They are trying to use best of the both worlds depending on the use case. So if we look at what are the use cases, when I talk about use cases, maybe it will become a bit more clear as to what hybrid is and why do we use hybrid. So sometimes there may be use case where I have, let's say, an e-commerce site or a web application which has multiple users. It is on-prem because I want to have all the controls with me. But I know that there are some peak seasons, maybe during Christmas, during Diwali or whatever, there will be a lot of requests from the users and there would be a peak in my request. That is where I go and utilize cloud during those peak times to scale seamlessly. These kind of use cases are known as cloud bursting, which means I am utilizing cloud whenever I see a burst in my request. So there people try to use a hybrid setup. Or in cases where data protection is required, organizations typically what they do is they would keep their database on-prem and they will shift their web apps to the cloud. So the web apps are utilizing all the cloud features, but yet their data is in more control and secure environment. Although if you look at cloud providers today, all of them have those kind of certifications, they adhere to compliance and all of that. But still organizations have some fear of putting all their PII information on cloud. In that case, they can go with this hybrid model of keeping the data on-prem and offloading the processing, the web apps, etc. maybe to cloud. And it can be use case by use case also. Certain apps go to cloud, certain remain on-prem. So these are the use cases that a hybrid setup would have. Now, let us look at other thing which is called multi-cloud. What does multi-cloud mean? Multi-cloud means, I would talk about primarily there are three major vendors, right? AWS, Google and Azure, but there are other companies as well. But essentially, if you look at multi-cloud, it means that we are trying to use two or more cloud providers together. I can use two, I can use three. Essentially, it is more than one. That is known as a multi-cloud setup, when you are using multiple vendors for your cloud setup. Now, in that, there are two broad categories. One is where we replicate our workload. The other is where we split our workload. What does this mean? In a multi-cloud setup, what does replication and splitting of the workload mean? and what is the use case for that. So if we see what is replicating a workload. Replicating a workload means I have, let's say, two cloud providers with whom I have my tie-up. Let's say AWS and Azure. Replicating means the same workload I am replicating on both AWS as well as Azure. Why? To get higher availability in case of outage. If my application is too critical and I'm not really satisfied with just having high availability disaster recovery in one cloud setup, what I would do is I would go for a multi-cloud setup with two vendors, let's say Amazon and Azure, and I would replicate my entire workload on both the cloud setups. So it will be there will be higher availability, and it can be geographically distributed. It may happen in certain geographies, maybe let's say a scenario where AWS is not present or Azure is not present. In that case, I would go for a multi-cloud setup. So this sounds very good, but it has its own challenges. We'll talk about it. But that's essentially what we say, a complete copy in both the cloud setups. Distributing workload, which means I identify which service is better in which of the cloud provider. Accordingly, I distribute my workload. So I distribute something on AWS and something on Azure. So it's basically choosing the best service provider for the use case. Another scenario can be when there are acquisitions and mergers. It is possible that one organization was using AWS, the other was using Azure. So when the acquisition or merger happens, they are still using both the cloud setups. So that's also a multi-cloud scenario. So these can be two primary reasons for going to a multi-cloud setup. Let's talk about challenges. Multi-cloud setup sounds very nice. You have like best of services from both the vendors, but it is a overhead in terms of management, definitely, because we have to learn different services, APIs from different cloud providers. So learning curve is higher. Understanding and getting to the point where you can operate with both of them is a bit higher, because you have now a broad range of services and APIs to learn. Management may be a bit difficult, but otherwise it gives you benefits of, like I said, high availability and like maybe some cost trade-off. So if you look at Azure, Amazon, Google, all of them mostly provide all kind of services and comparative costs at comparative cost. But still, if you look deeper at each service level, you would see differences in terms of cost. Sometimes people choose that, okay, for web app, let's say I'll go for AWS. For AI, ML, analytics, I'll go for Google. Or for some other use case, I want to go with Azure. So that's the kind of pros and cons they would, people would evaluate and then choose which vendors they want to use and how do they want to go for their multi-cloud setup. So this was a very quick primer on what is hybrid cloud, what is multi-cloud, what are the use cases, advantages and challenges. I hope this video gave you a glimpse of that. Please like, share and subscribe to the channel to get to more interesting videos every week. Thank you so much.